For almost 1800 years, there was a solid consensus on the authorship of 2 Thessalonians. It made its way into Marcion's canon around 140 AD and secured a place in the Muratorian canon between 180 and 200. Esteemed figures like Polycarp, Ignatius, Justin Martyr all alluded to it, and even Irenaeus directly referred to it. But in today's scholarly arena, doubts surface. Some scholars like Bart Ehrman vehemently contest Paul's authorship, presenting a multitude of rather peculiar reasons. Ehrman writes, "What seems relatively certain is that someone after the time of Paul decided that he had to intervene in a situation where people were so eagerly anticipating the end, so eagerly, he suggests, that they were neglecting the duties of daily life. He did so by penning a letter in Paul's name, knowing full well that he was someone else living later." 2 Thessalonians then appears to be another instance of Pauline forgery. So why, oh why, were those Thessalonian believers sitting around on their blessed assurance, idly waiting for Jesus' return after Paul's initial letter? Ehrman's take, well, he seems to attribute it to Paul's earlier letter, penned around 50 AD. Ehrman says, Paul wrote the Christians in Thessalonica because some of them had become disturbed over the death of a number of their fellow believers. Paul had taught them that the end of the age was imminent. Paul writes to assure the survivors that no, even those who died will be brought into the kingdom, referring to 1 Thessalonians 4:17. Read the verse carefully. Paul expects to be one of the ones who will still be alive when it happens. The day will come like a thief in the night, and when people think that all is well, sudden destruction will come upon them. So over time, the Thessalonian Christians are all in a fuss about Jesus' now not so imminent return, just hanging around waiting. According to Ehrman, there's this local Christian wondering, well, how do I get these folks back to work? They could have simply explained the whole apostasy and antichrist theory, adding details about some mysterious force holding everything back. It's kind of reminiscent of elements from the prophet Daniel's book, or so it seems, even if it contradicts Paul's earlier teachings. This Christian could have just labeled themselves a prophet, claiming a divine revelation. They could have even said, hey, guys, Jesus appeared to me and said, but nope. Ehrman continues, he writes, the Thessalonians can rest assured that they are not yet at the final moment of history when Jesus appears. They'll know when it is almost here by the events that will transpire in the fulfillment of Scripture. But can this be the same author who wrote the other letter, 1 Thessalonians? Compare the scenario of Jesus' appearance in 2 Thessalonians, according to which it will be a while yet and preceded by recognizable events, with that of 1 Thessalonians, when the end will come like a thief in the night, who appears when people least expect it. There seems to be a fundamental disparity between the teachings of 1 and 2 Thessalonians, which is why so many scholars think that 2 Thessalonians is not by Paul. So here's the thing that Ehrman is driving at. 1 Thessalonians hints at an imminent yet unpredictable end, while 2 Thessalonians throws caution to the wind, signaling obvious signs before it all goes down. But this whole mix of the end is near vibes, coupled with warnings and apparent signs, isn't anything new. It pops up in various Jewish texts about the end and even in the teachings of the Gospels. Take Matthew 24:33 for instance. It says, "But when you see these things, you will know that it is near, right at the door," referring to signs that Jesus mentioned. But then, in Matthew 24:44, it adds a twist with, "The Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him." So it makes perfect sense that Paul addresses the proximity of the end in 1 Thessalonians and the events preceding it in 2 Thessalonians, because he's dealing with different concerns in each letter. Ehrman and his scholarly buddies argue that Paul could not have preached what's in 2 Thessalonians because it doesn't match the idea that the early Christians, including Paul, expected Jesus to return any minute within a few years. But here's the thing, that idea just is not crystal clear at all. It seems they've exaggerated how quickly people thought Jesus would return in the early church and missed its importance in later apocalyptic Christian writings. Honestly, there just isn't a solid reason why Paul couldn't have taught what's in 2 Thessalonians around 50 AD. It actually lines up pretty well with what Jesus said in the Olivet Discourse. But Bart won't let those pesky facts get in his way. So what's the next twist in Ehrman's theory? He says, quote, "It is particularly interesting that the author of 2 Thessalonians indicates that he taught his converts all these things already when he was with them, verse 2:5. If that's the case, then how can one explain 1 Thessalonians? The problem there is that people think the end is supposed to come any day now, based on what Paul told them. But according to 2 Thessalonians, Paul never taught any such thing. He taught the whole sequence of events had to transpire before the end came. Moreover, if that is what he taught them, as 2 Thessalonian insists, then it is passing strange that he never reminds them of this teaching in 1 Thessalonians where they obviously think that they were taught something else. Alright, so let's break this down just a bit. So fake Paul is thinking, they won't buy my end-time theories without some divine authority behind them, and just saying that it's a personal revelation from God won't cut it. Then, out of the blue, a light bulb goes off. Eureka! I've got it, they exclaim. They grab their pen and start penning a letter in Paul's name. Then, the really audacious fibbing starts. Remember when I told you this stuff while we were hanging out? Because I totally did. To seal the deal, they sign it as Paul, boldly claiming, yeah, this is the signature in all my letters. I'm the real deal. Paul, no imposters here. But hold on a second. That passage about Paul's earlier teachings seems more like evidence for authenticity rather than the other way around. Consider that part about the force that's holding back the man of lawlessness. It's genuinely cryptic. Theologians still debate what it refers to today. Now imagine a forger slipping in such a puzzling passage and insisting that readers would get it because of a past conversation. However, Ehrman is thoroughly convinced that this whole, hey, it was definitely me, Paul, guys. I'm the one who shared all this when we hung out. You guys clearly forgot. Just check out my handwritten signature approach will completely fleece everyone. Earlier in the book, Ehrman writes, is 2 Thessalonians itself a forgery in Paul's name? If so, why would it warn against a forgery in Paul's name? There could be little doubt about the answer. One of the tricks used by ancient forgers is to assure readers that their own writings were authentic was to warn them against writings that were not authentic. Readers naturally assume that the author is not doing precisely what it condemns. This is utterly comical. It's akin to someone saying, I swear, I'm innocent, guys. And then Ehrman jumps in with, ha! Classic guilty person line. Regarding the signature, Ehrman continues saying, at the end of the letter, the author insists that he is Paul and gives a kind of proof, writing, I, Paul, write this greeting in my own hand. This is the mark of every letter of mine. It is the way that I write. What is peculiar is that the author claims that this is his invariant practice, but it is not how most of undisputed letters of Paul end, including 1 Thessalonians. The words are hard to account for as Paul's, but they make sense if a forger is trying to convince his readers that he really was Paul. But perhaps the queen doth protest too much. But hold on a second, let's think about this for just a moment. What letters could this forger be talking about? Besides the mention in 2 Thessalonians 3:17, Paul does sign 1 Corinthians and Colossians, although Ehrman argues that Colossians is fake, which I've tackled in another video. Anyway, in Philemon, he does sign the letter, but it's just about being willing to pay a debt. Then in Galatians, he showcases his messy handwriting to humble himself. But Ehrman is right, neither Romans nor 2 Corinthians have Paul's signature, and even 1 Thessalonians lacks the Paul signature treatment. But wouldn't a forger familiar with Paul's letters know this? The verbal similarities are closest to 1 Corinthians 16:21. So is Ehrman suggesting that that is all they had along with 1 Thessalonians? But even if they did possess all of Paul's letters or several, did they think to themselves, how else can I make this look official and pass it off as Paul's? Ehrman certainly seems to think so. But think about this. How on earth does a clever trickster ensure the discovery of their forged letter? Do they send it via carrier pigeon who goes, oops, stumbled upon this, sorry for the late delivery? Or maybe the forger stashes it away and says, whoa, look what I unearthed. Must have been lost in the shuffle. Golly, this conveniently answers so many questions. I'm not denying the presence of forged letters in the early church. Even 2 Thessalonians addresses this very issue. But this particular letter appears to address a specific problem within a particular group, attempting to sort out a mess supposedly caused by another letter forged in Paul's name. If that's the case, then adding his signature would indeed make a ton of sense. Wouldn't it be a lot more logical for Paul to clear up any confusion himself, shortly after writing his own initial letter to them? And could there genuinely be idle people in Thessalonica still waiting for Jesus to return 20 to 40 years after Paul's passing, all because of a letter that he sent decades ago? Ehrman's scenario seems bizarre on the surface, yet somehow it's taken as very serious scholarly work. If you're wondering why I'm critical of modern biblical criticism, it's due to nonsensical theories like this.